They thought I was just another spreadsheet lady, so they fired me. It happened on a Monday. The kind of Monday that already feels like a punch in the gut before you even sip your coffee. I had just finished reviewing Q2 forecasts for the West Coast Division. We were outperforming projections by nearly 17%. I didn't even look up when Derek Harlan burst into my office. He never knocked, never waited. Just swept in like he owned the air around him, cologne, sharp posture, cocky folder in hand. "Rachel," he said, like a sentence in itself. "We need to talk." I looked at the folder, at his smug expression, and then at the clock. 9:42 a.m. It was too early for drama, but not too early for Derek. "Sure," I said calmly, motioning to the seat across from me. He didn't sit. Of course not. That would imply equality. "We're restructuring the leadership team," he said, already flipping open the folder. "Effective immediately. Your role as Vice President of Finance will be dissolved." Just like that. No preamble, no performance review, no acknowledgement that my department had just led the company to its highest quarter in 3 years. "You're letting me go?" I asked. My voice didn't crack. I didn't flinch. I wanted to hear him say it. He smirked. "You're great with numbers, but we need leadership, people who inspire." Ah, there it was. The quiet jab wrapped in corporate buzzwords. What he meant was, I wasn't loud. I didn't command a room with bravado. I just did the work flawlessly without fanfare. By the end of the day, he added, "We'll need your laptop and badge." I stood up and extended my hand. "Thanks for the clarity." He shook it, visibly thrown off by my composure. He wanted tears. He got a handshake. I walked out with a cardboard box and a quiet resolve. By 11:00 a.m., I was home. The apartment felt foreign in daylight, like a hotel suite I hadn't planned to check into yet. I made tea. I didn't cry. Instead, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out the sealed envelope. My father had given it to me on my 30th birthday, with a simple instruction: don't open it until you have no choice but to lead. Well, today felt like that. I opened it slowly. Inside was a trust agreement. Not just any document, this one granted me 90% ownership of the company. Silent shares, legally binding, transferred to me the day I turned 30. My father had never sold his stake. He held it, then handed it quietly to me. There was a letter, too, written in his crisp serif handwriting. "Rachel, they may not see you coming. That's the point. You lead like I always hoped someone would lead. With thought, with restraint, with purpose. If you're reading this, you're ready. Now go show them. Dad." My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what it meant. I had always known he believed in me. But this was war armor. I called Gerald Whitman, our family's lawyer. "Gerald," I said, "it's time." He didn't ask questions, just responded. "Understood. I'll prepare the documents." By Thursday, the paperwork for a special shareholders meeting was drafted. It bore no name, no signature, just the legal authority tied to the 90% holding. Derek was still strutting around the executive floor like he was king of the hill. He had no idea he was standing on borrowed time. Everyone whispered about my quiet exit. Spinning theories, illness, burnout. Maybe I was just weak. I let them think whatever they wanted. On Friday, the formal notice went out to the board. A shareholder meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. No one knew who had called it. Derek certainly didn't. That weekend, I visited my father's grave, brought him a cup of his favorite dark roast, and sat beside the headstone in silence. "I'm going to do it," I whispered. Not for revenge, for correction. I imagined him smiling. He never liked drama. He liked clean lines, calculated steps, purpose over pride. When Tuesday morning came, I dressed in the same navy suit I wore when I first presented a budget plan to the board 10 years ago. It still fit. Just like my intentions. As I left the apartment, I glanced at the photo on my bookshelf, Dad and me standing outside the company's first office, both of us squinting into the sun. "Let's finish what we started," I said to the photo and walked out the door. The meeting room was booked. The documents were legal. The power was real. Derek didn't know it yet. But by the time this week ended, he would. They called me useless. Turns out useless holds the keys. They took away my badge, but they forgot I owned the building. That thought alone was enough to make me smile as I sat across from Gerald Whitman, our family attorney, in his downtown Seattle office. The room smelled of old leather and mahogany polish. The same room my father used to visit every quarter, without fail tucked behind the reception desk of Whitman and Cole. I remembered sitting on that very leather chair when I was just 10, swinging my legs while he talked numbers I didn't yet understand. Now I was here for the numbers that changed everything. "Happy birthday, Rachel," Gerald said with a faint, knowing smile, pushing a thick envelope toward me. "Your father planned this day meticulously." I didn't say anything, just opened the envelope. Inside was the trust document notarized and airtight. On my 40th birthday, I officially became the majority shareholder of Lawson Dynamics. 90%. Not a typo, not an exaggeration, just raw, overwhelming control handed down without ceremony. I reached the letter next. My father's handwriting clean, deliberate. "If they won't offer you a seat, bring your own table. If they push you aside, wait. If they call you useless, let them finish the sentence, then show them the signature that matters." I blinked back the sting in my eyes. Not tears, not yet. Just the sudden flood of clarity, of purpose. "We need to move quickly," Gerald said gently. "Per your father's conditions, you now have full voting power. You can call a special shareholder meeting. But keep this quiet. Derek can't know until you're ready." "He won't hear it from me," I said, standing. That night I didn't sleep. I reviewed every internal memo I could find, every performance report from the past 6 quarters. Derek had been glossing over underperformance with flashy slide decks. HR reports buried. Complaints unanswered. Expenses padded with executive perks. I looped in Savannah, no Monica, now my assistant and longtime confidant, who had seen firsthand how the culture under Derek was eroding. "We're doing this?" she asked, voice low. "We already did," I said. By morning, Monica had already pulled archived complaint forms and a financial trail of misallocated resources. I crafted a shareholder briefing packet with a title that made me smirk. "Integrity and Leadership, a Reassessment." 5 days. That was the minimum required notice. The legal notice to the board was sent by noon. I didn't sign it with a title. I signed it as a shareholder. At the same time, Gerald submitted the transfer verification to the company registrar. My name was now on record as the sole controlling shareholder. Derek, of course, had no idea. He was still walking around the office like he owned the oxygen. On the 5th day, the board secretary scheduled the meeting. Derek approved it himself, thinking it was a mid-year strategy session. He even added it to the internal company calendar. "This will be a great opportunity," he announced to the exec team in Slack, "to align leadership priorities moving forward." Monica sent me the screenshot. I didn't reply. I was already drafting my opening statement. The night before the meeting, I sat alone in my apartment, the city glowing outside the window. I didn't feel nervous. I felt awake. I poured a glass of wine, opened my laptop, and stared at the agenda one last time. Item 1, Executive Leadership Review. The power wasn't in the words. It was in the silence that would follow. When people who thought they erased you finally realize you wrote the ending. I turned off the lights early that night. Not because I needed rest, but because I already knew the sun would rise with my name on the building. And this time no one could delete it. They thought I was gone. I walked in and took the seat at the head of the table. It was 8:58 a.m. on a quiet Tuesday morning, and the boardroom on the 21st floor buzzed with corporate chatter. A plate of pastries sat untouched in the center of the glass table, and Derek Harlan, impeccably groomed as always, was in the middle of a performance disguised as a strategy meeting. His voice rang out with confidence, presenting projections riddled with overinflated claims and shallow buzzwords. He had no idea I was already in the building. The elevator ride had been silent, except for the calm voice of Gerald Whitman, my family's lawyer, standing beside me, with a sealed leather folder in hand. We didn't need to talk. Everything had already been set in motion. 5 days earlier, I filed the shareholder notice. 5 minutes from now, the curtain would drop. The receptionist glanced up as we passed. Her eyes widened, but she said nothing. I nodded back. Just another Tuesday until it wasn't. The moment I stepped into the boardroom, a hush fell over the room like a gust of cold air. Derek froze mid-sentence, holding a clicker like it was a baton of control. His smile faltered as his eyes locked onto mine. "Rachel," he said slowly, clearly unsure how to proceed. "Only board members are allowed in this meeting." I didn't blink. I walked to the head of the table, pulled out the leather chair that once belonged to my father, and set down the folder. "Exactly," I said. "That's why I'm here." Confused murmurs broke out. Someone dropped their pen. Another shifted uncomfortably in their seat. Derek chuckled a hollow, dismissive sound. "You're not an employee anymore. This isn't appropriate." "I'm not here as an employee," I said, opening the folder and sliding the documents across the table. "I'm here as the majority shareholder." Silence. Then a cough. Then nothing again. Gerald stepped forward and handed a second set of documents to the company's secretary, a woman named Lillian, who had been with the company nearly as long as I had. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the numbers. Her voice was quiet but firm. "This is accurate. The trust confirms ownership of 90% of the company's stock. The documents are notarized and compliant." Derek's face flushed with visible panic. "This is a stunt." "It's not," I said. "It's succession." I pulled out the remote for the projector, one I hadn't used in years, and brought up the first slide: internal performance audits. The numbers didn't lie. Under Derek's leadership, employee turnover had spiked. Customer retention had dropped, and our reputation among suppliers had suffered. The second slide showed employee satisfaction surveys most hadn't been reviewed, but I had copies. Words like disconnected, unstable, and no trust in leadership repeated like a warning siren. "I believe in numbers," I said simply, "and people. Both have been mismanaged." The final slide was a short video. My father, in the last year of his life, seated on our back porch with a mug of coffee in hand. His voice, steady if aged, filled the room. "If Rachel's reading this, then the time has come. I built this company on integrity and patience. I've watched her grow in both. She doesn't need to ask for her seat at the table, because the table was meant for her." When the screen faded to black, no one spoke. Even the HVAC system seemed to quiet. I stood. "As majority shareholder, I'm formally requesting a vote to remove Derek Harlan from the position of Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately." Gasps. Lillian looked to Gerald, who nodded once. "With 90% of the vote, the motion carries," she said. Derek slammed his hand on the table. "This is insane. You can't do this." "I already did," I replied. He looked around the room, searching for a lifeline, anyone to support him. But none came. No one stood. No one defended him. The people who had once nodded to his empty speeches were now stone silent. He grabbed his notes and stormed out without another word. I didn't watch him go. Instead, I sat down at the head of the table, the seat he thought was his, but never earned. "I'm not here for revenge," I told the room. "I'm here because this company deserves better. So do the people who've carried it quietly for years." I closed the folder. That starts today. There were no claps, no celebrations. Just the kind of silence that signals something permanent had shifted. Outside the window, Seattle's skyline stretched wide and still. But inside that room, something had ended and something stronger had just begun. Somewhere I imagined my father smiling, and I smiled too. Not for what I had taken back, but for what I was about to rebuild. They expected revenge. I gave them something harder to ignore change. After that board meeting, I didn't march straight into the CEO's office like some conquering hero. I didn't need a leather chair or a brass nameplate to prove my point. What I needed was to return to the place where the company truly lived, in the quiet spaces between the people who had kept it standing through sheer grit and silence. In the first 2 weeks, I didn't issue any big memos. No new leadership, new vision emails. I did the opposite. I stayed quiet. I walked the halls. I listened. I ate lunch in the break room, the one that had been mostly empty, because people were too afraid to look not busy. I sat in the customer service area where Maya worked the young woman with calm eyes and quiet persistence. One morning I came in early and saw her helping a colleague fix a system error. No one had asked her to. No one was watching. She just did it because it needed doing. A few days later, I asked her into my office. She stepped in with her notebook, bracing for a reprimand. "I need a head of client experience," I said. She blinked. "You've already been doing the job," I told her. "Now it's official." I signed the promotion letter right in front of her. She didn't cry loudly. She just exhaled like something heavy had finally lifted off her chest. She left the room, and I knew I'd made the right call. Not long after, I reached out to Kevin. Kevin had been a brilliant product engineer, one of our best. He left 6 months earlier after being overlooked again and again, while his less capable boss claimed credit for his work. "I can't believe this is real," he said, staring at the offer. "It is," I told him. "I need you back. Come help me fix what they broke." He said yes, without hesitation. The deeper I went, the more I saw what my father had tried to warn me about. You can't build something strong by slapping fresh paint over rotten beams. The company culture had been built on silence. People didn't speak up because they were afraid. Afraid of being punished, ignored, or labeled difficult. I reopened the HR archives. There were over 40 unresolved complaints, some dating back years. Most of the people who filed them had already left. A few, incredibly, were still showing up to work like nothing was wrong. I didn't create a flashy investigative committee. I scheduled quiet, private meetings, one-on-one, no nameplates, no note-takers, just truth. I listened. I apologized. Then I acted. 4 mid-level managers were gone by the end of that week. No drama, no email announcements. They just left. The message was loud, without saying a word. I launched a new program, Quiet Leaders. No applications, no internal politics. My team and I picked people ourselves. Every week, one person, anyone, was recognized for real contributions that helped others or improved how things worked. The reward wasn't big, a paid day off lunch with leadership and a spotlight in our internal bulletin, but the effect transformational. For the first time in years, the company bulletin board came alive. The unofficial team lead got her own desk and title. The quiet girl in the corner now stood in front of departments, sharing process innovations. One late evening, I stayed behind after hours. I walked past the engineering floor, the same space that had once felt cold and clinical. Now soft music played. There was laughter. Someone brewed fresh coffee. Fingers tapped calmly at keyboards, not frantically. I paused by the whiteboard. Someone had written in thick blue marker. She didn't return for revenge. She returned to rebuild. I stood there for a while. No one knew I saw it. I didn't need them to. I didn't return to be called an inspiring female CEO. I returned so people didn't have to shrink their dreams just to fit inside the building. The next day, I sat down with Monica, the woman who had been at my side through all the quiet battles. She handed me a report. Employee satisfaction was up 27%. Resignation rates had dropped by 40%. And for the first time in 5 years, customer feedback was overwhelmingly positive. I smiled. Not for the numbers, but because I knew we were moving in the right direction. I used to think I came back to teach them a lesson. Now I realize forgiveness isn't about making them feel better. It's about setting yourself free. They fired me like I didn't matter. 1 year later, I walked back in not for revenge, but to rebuild what they almost destroyed. The air was different that morning. Lighter, quieter, like the building itself remembered. I stood in front of the same glass doors I had walked out of 12 months ago, not with a cardboard box and a forced smile this time, but with a calm purpose. A full circle. No announcement, no cameras, no need. A receptionist I barely knew from a year ago looked up from her desk, blinking twice. Then she smiled. "Good morning, Ms. Lawson." I nodded. "Rachel, please. We're all on the same side now." And we were. Because for the first time in years, this wasn't a place ruled by fear or hierarchy, but by purpose. The company had changed, not because I had come back with power, but because I returned with clarity. That clarity came not from the shares I held, but from the silence I endured, the injustice I survived, and the promise I made to myself the day I walked out. I would come back not to burn it all down, but to rebuild something better. I passed familiar halls. The lighting seemed warmer, now the tones of conversation less strained. In the kitchen, someone had written a quote on the whiteboard. "Power is not the chair. It's the courage to stand before one." Nobody erased it. Nobody dared. It was our first annual team gathering since I became CEO, and it wasn't about me. It was about us. I had asked each department to nominate someone to share a 1-minute story. A change they had seen, a person they now respected, a moment that proved the shift was real. Maya stood first. The former customer service rep who once cleaned up behind louder voices now led the client experience team. She spoke without notes. "I used to think being good meant staying invisible. Rachel made me visible without asking me to change who I was." Then came Kevin. He spoke of his return not because he was begged, but because he was believed. She didn't ask me to fix the mess. She asked if I was willing to help build something clean. Even the interns, the security team, the maintenance lead. They shared stories not about policies or raises, but about being heard, being respected, being human. When it was my turn, I didn't walk to a podium. I just stood where I was, center aisle, surrounded by the people who made this company breathe again. "I know some of you remember the day I left," I began. "I do too. They called me useless, said I lacked leadership. I let that hang. But leadership isn't always loud. It's sometimes the quiet persistence to keep showing up even when you're unseen. It's choosing to stay kind in a room that rewards cruelty. And it's having the patience to rebuild piece by piece what others are too arrogant to protect." The room was still, no applause, not yet. Just that sacred quiet when truth finds its place. I didn't come back to be anyone's boss. I came back to make sure that those who work in the quiet, the unseen, the uncelebrated, are never invisible again. I don't want you to remember me. I want you to remember each other. A pause. And then one by one they stood, not clapping, just standing, in agreement, in respect, in something deeper than approval trust. Afterward, as people returned to their departments, I stayed behind, alone in the room. A small note had been left on my chair, folded once, no name. Inside it read, "She wasn't promoted. She was remembered." I closed my eyes. I thought of my father, of the day he signed over the trust, of the long years I stayed silent doing the work that no one clapped for. And I smiled, not because I had won, but because I had kept the promise not to lose myself in the fight, but to return with my integrity intact. In the end, legacy isn't built on revenge. It's built on the quiet, consistent act of choosing to become the person you needed when the world told you to shrink. That's what they couldn't erase. When Rachel Lawson walked out of that company, most thought it was the end for someone who just worked on spreadsheets. What they didn't know, she owned the blueprint they were all standing on. This story isn't just about power. It's about quiet strength. It's about a woman dismissed, underestimated, and forgotten, who didn't scream for recognition, but chose to rebuild everything that mattered instead. Here's what we take away. 1. Real power doesn't need to shout. 2. Walking away quietly doesn't mean you've lost. 3. Justice isn't always about revenge. Sometimes it's restoration. Rachel didn't come back to get even. She came back to protect a legacy, to lift up the voices buried under years of noise and false leadership. And she didn't need a title or applause to do it. She needed courage, patience, and the truth. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a silent injustice, a time you were told you weren't enough, know this: you don't need permission to take back your place. You only need to remember who you are. Have you ever been pushed out of your own story? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this inspired you, hit like, click subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded. The quietest returns are often the most powerful. And sometimes, the best revenge is rebuilding better, not louder.